Why does working a full-time job no longer pay the bills? Imagine working 40, 50, or even 60 hours a week, only to find that your paycheck doesn't even cover rent, let alone other living expenses. What's broken in our system? And more importantly, is there a way out of this financial trap? Let's uncover the hidden truth behind wage stagnation and how it's leaving millions of Americans struggling to make ends meet. The wage and housing divide. A historical perspective. A few decades ago, earning enough to cover rent and still have money left for food, savings, and even a vacation wasn't the impossible dream it feels like today. Wages and housing costs, while never perfectly aligned, used to at least feel predictable. You knew that your paycheck could reasonably handle the basics, leaving some room to breathe. But something changed, quietly at first, in a way that left many struggling to catch up. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the 1970s, when the balance between wages and housing costs began to slip out of workers' favor. During this time, productivity in the United States started climbing at an impressive rate. Workers were producing more, businesses were expanding, and the economy was growing. However, wages didn't grow at nearly the same pace. From 1979 to 2024, productivity rose by more than 80%, yet average hourly wages increased by just 29.4%. For context, that gap means workers were generating more value than ever, but had little of that reflected in their paychecks. Meanwhile, costs in the housing market didn't wait around. Rent and home prices accelerated far faster than wages. By the 1980s, cracks in affordability were starting to show, even though they hadn't yet reached today's crisis levels. Let's wrap some real numbers around this disparity. In the 1980s, the median rent in Miami, for example, was $345 per month, which adjusted for inflation comes out to about $1,100 today. Back then, the median worker made roughly $25,000 annually, or about $48,000 in today's dollars. Fast forward to 2023. The same worker's salary has barely cleared $55,000, but median rent in Miami is now over $2,300 per month. That's more than double the inflation-adjusted cost from 40 years ago. Compare that with a place like Buffalo, where rents rose more modestly, but even there, the gap between wage growth and housing costs has increased. Both cities tell the same story. Stagnant wages combined with rapidly rising living expenses leave fewer and fewer options for workers. Even in traditionally lower-cost areas, what made the shift from affordable to out of reach happen so quickly? The answer isn't just market forces or natural economic growth. It's shaped by deliberate policy decisions. The federal minimum wage, for instance, hasn't kept up with inflation or the actual cost of living. In 2023, the value of the minimum wage was about 30% lower than its peak in the late 1960s, when adjusted for inflation. Think about that. A job paying the minimum then could buy far more than the same job today. At the same time, union membership and collective bargaining, the tools that helped many workers secure higher pay, have declined drastically. This erosion has stripped workers of the power to demand salaries that keep pace with the rising cost of living, leaving them vulnerable to financial insecurity. Add to this the soaring costs of single-family homes and private rentals driven by speculative investments and zoning laws that limit the supply of affordable housing. These laws, which often prioritize single-family homes over multi-unit developments, make it difficult for supply to meet the growing demand for affordable options. The result? Fierce competition for rental units and higher prices that continue to climb. Even workers holding down full-time jobs face impossible trade-offs, such as choosing between rent and groceries or delaying critical health care to avoid falling behind on other bills. It's clear that this growing wage and housing divide isn't just an unfortunate coincidence of bad timing. It's the result of systemic changes, some intentional, some neglected, that have chipped away at the financial stability many once took for granted. And this gap has become the defining backdrop to modern financial stress, forcing millions to work harder just to stay afloat. But as tough as the current landscape feels, it's only part of the picture. The housing market itself plays a critical role in stacking the odds against renters. And the way it operates today makes navigating this crisis even tougher. Let's take a closer look. Renting in America. The reality of the crisis. How do you actually measure whether rent is affordable or completely out of reach? One key concept is the rent-to-income ratio, which compares how much of your paycheck goes toward housing. The general rule says that rent should take up no more than 30% of your monthly income. This threshold is meant to ensure that you have enough left over to cover other essentials, like food, transportation, and savings. But for millions of renters today, that 30% mark feels like an impossible dream. In cities across the country, it's not uncommon for rent to swallow half, or even more, of a person's income. And this isn't just a big city problem anymore. Take Miami, for example. On average, residents here spend over 50% of their income on rent. That means if you're making $4,000 a month, at least $2,000 is immediately gone before you've even paid for groceries. Compare that to Buffalo, where rents are much lower, averaging closer to 30 to 35% of what people earn. While Buffalo might seem more manageable on paper, renters there still feel the squeeze, because local wages haven't kept up with even those modest costs. The locations may differ, but the outcome is the same. Workers are stretched thin, caught in a system where the numbers simply don't add up. And it's not just the numbers that tell the story. It's the lived experience of renters across the US. Consider Claudia, a single mother in Austin, Texas, juggling 2 part-time jobs while trying to keep her rent payments on time. Despite working almost 50 hours a week, she struggles to make ends meet because her paychecks are inconsistent, thanks to her job in the gig economy. Meanwhile, Samuel, a warehouse worker in Atlanta, has been on the waiting list for affordable housing for over a year. He's lived in the same 1-bedroom apartment for the past 5 years, but his rent has gone up by 30%. Raising concerns with his landlord could mean risking eviction, an option he can't afford. These stories aren't just isolated struggles. They're part of a larger trend that affects millions of Americans, particularly minorities, young adults, and those at the lower end of the income spectrum. According to data from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, for every 100 extremely low-income renter households, there are only 34 affordable rental units available. This kind of shortage puts low-income households in a difficult position, forcing them to compete for limited options while wealthier renters drive up demand in previously affordable neighborhoods. It creates a ripple effect, where even areas historically known for lower costs are now, for many, out of reach. And the increase in housing costs doesn't just mean tightening your budget. It means making tough sacrifices. For some, that might mean skipping routine medical checkups, because co-pays feel like a luxury rather than a necessity. For others, it could mean working a second or third job to avoid falling into debt, leaving barely any time for family or rest. Debt also becomes a recurring theme. Many renters report relying on credit cards to cover emergency expenses, or even just to get by until their next paycheck. Over time, it's a vicious cycle that traps people in perpetual financial stress. The housing affordability crisis is not just about rent being too high. It's about a system that forces millions of people to make impossible choices. These challenges stem from decades of stagnant wages, structural inequality, and a lack of political will to prioritize affordable housing. The result is a growing population of renters who keep sliding further behind financially, no matter how hard they work. But the crisis is even bigger than housing alone. Economic changes like inflation, the rise of gig work, and hidden living costs make it even harder for renters to stay ahead. To really understand why this problem feels so inescapable, we need to unpack how these trends interact, and how they deepen the financial strain on working people everywhere. Let's break it down next. The perfect storm, gig work, inflation, and hidden costs. The way people work has changed a lot in the past decade, and one of the biggest shifts has been the rise of the gig economy. Millions of workers now rely on flexible, temporary jobs, like rideshare driving, food delivery, freelance design, or contracting, as a primary source of income. For some, it's a lifeline, offering freedom over hours or a way to piece together an income when traditional jobs aren't accessible. But gig work comes with some serious trade-offs. These positions often lack critical benefits, like health insurance, retirement plans, or paid time off. That means workers in the gig economy shoulder not only the responsibility of unpredictable pay, but also the full burden of covering these costs out of pocket. For many, it's a constant struggle to stay financially secure. The size of the gig economy is enormous and still growing. It's projected to triple by 2032, with estimates suggesting gig work could make up half of the workforce within the next decade. While these jobs provide flexibility, their structure often leads to unstable income. One week, you might pull in enough to cover rent, bills, and more. The next week, your earnings can drop dramatically, leaving you scrambling. And without any safety nets, like unemployment benefits or employer-paid health coverage, gig workers don't have a cushion when things go wrong. This unpredictability creates a worrying financial cycle, particularly when you add in broader economic forces like inflation eating away at the value of every dollar earned. Inflation plays a massive role in all of this. In recent years, the cost of everyday essentials has risen at a speed that wages, both in gig work and traditional jobs, haven't matched. For the first time in decades, inflation outpaced wage growth, starting in 2021. The result? Workers don't just feel like their paychecks don't stretch as far. They're objectively worth less. Groceries, car repairs, childcare, and especially rent have all increased in price, leaving people with less financial breathing room even if their income stays steady. Combine this with the inconsistent paychecks of gig work, and it's easy to see why so many workers are finding it harder not just to save, but simply to get by. And then there are the hidden costs, the ones that don't show up in a straightforward budget, but still drain resources each month. Think about student loan payments, which for many workers are hundreds of dollars each month. Add in rising healthcare expenses, which gig workers often bear entirely on their own. And you're looking at a significant portion of income disappearing before it even touches rent or utilities. Speaking of utilities, those bills have become another strain, especially since energy costs have risen over the past several years. Maybe you've noticed it yourself. Those little increases to your electricity or gas bill that seem small but start adding up in the long run. These hidden expenses might not get as much attention as rent prices, but they're a huge part of why financial stress feels inescapable for so many. Look at people like Jordan in Chicago. They cobble together income as a Lyft driver and part-time graphic designer. Some months, Jordan earns enough to make rent and even pay down a bit of credit card debt. But when demand drops or unexpected car maintenance eats into their earnings, they're forced to use their credit card to cover basics like groceries. That debt piles up, and over time, it becomes harder to climb out of. Or consider Maria in Los Angeles, who works multiple jobs, one full-time and one gig-based, just to support her family. The rising costs of living mean Maria has cut back on family activities and, even worse, skipped doctor's visits to save money. These aren't unique stories. They reflect the reality so many face, where hustling harder doesn't guarantee progress, just survival. What all of this creates is a perfect storm. Gig work's lack of stability, inflation eroding wage value, and mounting hidden costs make it harder for workers to break free from financial pressure. Instead of building wealth or gaining control over their futures, many find themselves stuck in a cycle of managing immediate needs. It's exhausting and unsustainable. Addressing these challenges requires larger systemic solutions. But what can the individuals do now to ease the pressure? Let's explore some strategies, starting with ways to adapt within this challenging system. Working harder, taking on side gigs, or cutting back on expenses isn't enough when the system keeps wages stuck while housing costs climb. Change starts with understanding. Educate yourself about local housing policies. Issues like zoning laws can directly impact rental affordability. Advocacy matters too. As highlighted by Oxfam, the federal government has failed to raise standards for all workers' wages, worker protections, and rights to organize, resulting in increased inequality. Another option? Explore creative living arrangements, such as shared housing or relocating to cities with better rent-to-income ratios, like Buffalo. These steps won't fix everything, but they can create momentum.